The rain hammered against the window pane of Ethan Cole's cramped Brooklyn apartment with relentless fury, each droplet a reminder of the storm that had consumed his life over the past 18 months. He sat hunched over his laptop, the glow of the screen casting harsh shadows across his unshaven face, eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night spent chasing leads that went nowhere. Empty coffee cups littered the desk like tombstones, marking the death of his once promising career, and the air hung heavy with the stale smell of takeout containers he hadn't bothered to throw away. Outside, the November wind howled through the narrow streets of Brooklyn, rattling the fire escape and sending loose newspapers tumbling down the sidewalk like urban tumbleweeds. The city that had once felt like the center of the universe now seemed to close in on him, suffocating and indifferent to his fall from grace. Ethan scrolled through his old articles, each headline a ghost of credibility past, each byline a painful reminder of the journalist he used to be before the Anderson exposé had blown up in his face. He had been so certain, so convinced he had uncovered corruption at the highest levels of city government, but when his source vanished and the evidence crumbled under scrutiny, the media turned on him with the same veracity they once celebrated his work. Now his name was poison, whispered in newsrooms as a cautionary tale about ambition unchecked by verification. His phone buzzed, breaking the oppressive silence. An unknown number. Ethan hesitated, his finger hovering over the decline button, but desperation made him answer. "Ethan Cole," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Mr. Cole, my name is Lena Hart. I'm a digital behavior analyst, and I believe we need to talk." Her voice was crisp, professional, but underneath he detected something else, urgency, maybe even fear. "I don't do interviews anymore," Ethan replied, already preparing to hang up. "This isn't about an interview. It's about a pattern I've discovered in online conspiracy communities, something bigger than anything you've investigated before. I've read your work, the real work, before the Anderson case. You're the only journalist I trust to understand what I'm seeing." The words hung in the air between them, tempting and dangerous. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the familiar pull of a story, that electric sensation that had once defined his existence. "I'm listening," he said finally. 20 minutes later, they agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Manhattan, neutral territory where the noise would mask their conversation. Ethan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back. When had he become this person? This hollow shell carrying the weight of failure like a second skin. He splashed cold water on his face, the shock bringing momentary clarity. Maybe this was it, the chance he had been waiting for. Or maybe it was just another dead end in a journey filled with them. The subway ride into Manhattan felt interminable, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead as passengers scrolled through their phones, each lost in their own digital universe. Ethan watched them, wondering how many believed in chemtrails or flat earth theories, how many had fallen down rabbit holes of misinformation that seemed to multiply faster than truth could catch up. The world had changed in ways he was only beginning to understand, fragmenting into 1,000 different realities where facts were negotiable and consensus was impossible. Lena Hart was already waiting when he arrived, seated in a corner booth with her laptop open and a cappuccino growing cold beside her. She was younger than he expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that assessed him the moment he walked through the door. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup, the look of someone who had more important things to worry about than appearances. "You look worse than your LinkedIn photo," she said without preamble, as he slid into the booth across from her. "That was taken 3 years ago in another life," Ethan replied, signaling the barista for coffee. "Let's skip the small talk. What did you find?" Lena turned her laptop toward him, revealing a complex web of data points, social media accounts, and interconnected threads that looked like a spider's web designed by a mathematician. For the past 6 months, I've been tracking disinformation campaigns across major platforms. What started as academic research became something else when I noticed patterns that shouldn't exist. Coordinated messaging across disparate conspiracy communities, from QAnon offshoots to anti-vaccine networks to groups claiming the government is conducting secret experiments. Different narratives, but the same underlying structure, the same psychological triggers, almost like someone is orchestrating it all. Ethan leaned forward, his journalist instincts awakening from their long hibernation. The coffee shop around them faded into background noise, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, the rain still falling outside. All of it dissolved as he focused on the screen before him. "Show me everything," he said, and for the first time in 18 months, Ethan Cole felt something he thought he had lost forever: hope. The data Lena presented over the next 2 hours was simultaneously fascinating and terrifying, a glimpse into an ecosystem of belief that operated by rules Ethan was only beginning to comprehend. She walked him through algorithmic patterns that shepherded users from moderate skepticism into increasingly extreme positions, showing him how a person questioning vaccine safety could, within weeks, find themselves convinced of global population control conspiracies. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, pulling up chat logs, forum posts, and video transcripts that painted a picture of coordinated manipulation on a scale he had never imagined. "The sophistication is what scares me," Lena explained, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "This isn't random. Someone understands exactly how to exploit confirmation bias, social identity theory, and the human need for pattern recognition. They're weaponizing psychology." Ethan scribbled notes in the margins of his notebook, the old-school habit he had never abandoned even in the digital age. Outside, the afternoon light was fading, and the coffee shop had begun to fill with the after-work crowd, young professionals seeking refuge from the November chill. "Why come to me?" Ethan asked, looking up from his notes. "You could take this to the Times, the Post, any legitimate outlet with resources I don't have anymore." Lena's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through her professional facade. "Because this is personal for me too. My brother David, he got sucked into this world 2 years ago. Started with some YouTube videos about government surveillance, which, okay, the NSA stuff is real, but then it spiraled. Now he believes in adrenochrome harvesting, that the moon landing was faked, that there's a cabal of elites controlling everything. I've lost him, Ethan. He won't talk to me anymore, says I'm part of the system, that I've been brainwashed by mainstream science." Her voice cracked slightly, and she took a long sip of her cold cappuccino to compose herself. "I need to understand how this happened, and maybe if we can expose the mechanism, show people how they're being manipulated, I can reach him, or at least help prevent it from happening to someone else's family." The confession hung between them, raw and honest, in a way that reminded Ethan why he had become a journalist in the first place. Not for awards or prestige, but to tell stories that mattered, to shine light into dark corners where truth had been buried. He thought about his own demons, the Anderson case, and how his certainty had blinded him to red flags he should have seen. "I know what it's like to lose someone to an obsession," he said quietly. "Even if that someone is yourself." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared understanding creating an unspoken bond. Around them, life continued in its ordinary chaos. Couples arguing over trivial matters, students cramming for exams, the barista calling out names for orders, all of it a reminder that while they chased shadows and conspiracies, the world kept turning, indifferent to the battles being fought in its digital underbelly. Lena closed her laptop with a decisive click. "I have a source, someone inside one of the major conspiracy networks who's getting cold feet about what they're involved in. They reached out to me anonymously through an encrypted channel, said they have documents, proof of coordination. maybe even funding sources. But they'll only meet in person, and they specifically asked for a journalist to be present, someone who could verify and publish what they provide. That's where you come in. Ethan felt his pulse quicken, the familiar adrenaline rush of a breaking story flooding his system. This was it, the opportunity he had been desperately seeking, but it came wrapped in risk. If he pursued this and failed again, there would be no recovery, no third act in his career. He would be finished, relegated to writing clickbait for content farms or abandoning journalism altogether. But if he succeeded, if this led where Lena believed it would, it could be the story that defined his generation, that pulled back the curtain on the machinery of modern disinformation. When and where, he asked, and the decision was made, irrevocable as gravity. Tomorrow night, a warehouse district in Queens. The source was very specific about security protocols. No phones, no recordings, just pen and paper. They're paranoid. But given what they claim to know, maybe paranoia is justified. Ethan nodded, already mentally preparing for the meeting, running through questions he would ask, verification methods he would employ. He had learned his lesson from the Anderson debacle. This time, every fact would be checked. Every source corroborated, every piece of evidence scrutinized until it either proved true or fell apart. He would not let ambition override rigor again. As they left the coffee shop and stepped into the cold November evening, the city lights reflected off wet pavement, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed almost beautiful despite the decay and chaos that lurked beneath the surface. Ethan pulled his coat tighter against the wind and glanced at Lena, this stranger who had suddenly become his partner in an investigation that could either redeem them both or destroy what little credibility they had left. "Be careful going home," she said, her breath visible in the frigid air. "If I'm right about the scale of this, we might already be on someone's radar." The words should have sounded paranoid, melodramatic even, but instead, they felt like a cold truth settling into Ethan's bones. And as he watched Lena disappear into the subway entrance, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had just crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. The warehouse district in Queens looked like something out of a dystopian film. Abandoned industrial buildings looming against a sky heavy with clouds that promised more rain. Ethan arrived 30 minutes early, a habit from his investigative days when scouting locations had saved him from more than one dangerous situation. He had left his phone at home as instructed, carrying only a small notebook and 2 pens tucked into his jacket pocket. The isolation of the area was absolute. No residential buildings, no late-night businesses, just the hollow shells of American manufacturing's decline and the occasional rat scurrying between piles of discarded machinery. Streetlights flickered with dying bulbs, casting unreliable shadows that seemed to move with malicious intent, and the wind carried the chemical smell of the East River, mixed with decades of urban decay. Ethan's breath formed clouds in the cold air as he walked the perimeter, checking sightlines and escape routes with the paranoia that Lena's warning had instilled. Lena appeared exactly on time, emerging from a rideshare that dropped her 2 blocks away. She wore all black practical clothing that allowed for movement and carried a small backpack that Ethan assumed held her own notebook and whatever tools a digital behavior analyst brought to clandestine meetings. "See anything suspicious?" she asked as she approached, her eyes scanning the area with the same cautious assessment he had just performed. "Just us and the ghosts of American industry," Ethan replied, attempting levity that fell flat in the oppressive atmosphere. They made their way to the designated building, a 3-story structure with boarded windows and graffiti declaring various political allegiances and gang territories. The door was unlocked as promised, and they entered a vast, empty space that had once housed assembly lines, but now contained only pigeons and the detritus of forgotten labor. Their footsteps echoed against concrete floors, the sound amplifying their vulnerability. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the warehouse, moving slowly, deliberately, with hands visible to show they weren't armed. As the person came closer, Ethan could make out features. A man in his late 20s, thin and nervous, with the haunted look of someone carrying secrets too heavy to bear alone. "You came," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper despite the empty space. "I wasn't sure you would, or if you'd bring police." Lena stepped forward, her posture open and non-threatening. "Just us, as you requested. I'm Lena. This is Ethan. You can trust us. But we need to be able to trust you too." "What's your name?" The man hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Call me Marcus. It's not my real name, but it's what I go by in the community. I've been part of the network for 3 years, helping coordinate messaging across platforms. And I thought I was doing something important, exposing truth that the mainstream media wouldn't touch. But 6 months ago, things changed. New leadership, new directives, and suddenly we weren't just sharing information anymore. We were creating it, fabricating evidence, manipulating people in ways that started to feel wrong." Ethan pulled out his notebook, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I need specifics, Marcus. Names, organizations, funding sources. Without verification, this is just another conspiracy theory, and we've got enough of those already." Marcus reached into his jacket, and both Ethan and Lena tensed, but he only pulled out a USB drive. "Everything is on here. Chat logs, financial transactions, directives from the top explaining exactly how to craft narratives to maximize engagement and radicalization. There's even a database of targeted individuals, journalists, politicians, activists, people they've been systematically discrediting through coordinated campaigns. Your name is in there, Ethan. The Anderson case wasn't just bad luck. You were set up. Your source was compromised from the beginning." The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. 18 months of self-recrimination suddenly recontextualized. He had been so focused on his own failure that he never considered the possibility of deliberate sabotage. The implications were staggering, and he felt rage building beneath the shock, a burning need for vindication that threatened to overwhelm his professional detachment. Lena took the USB drive, holding it carefully as if it might explode. "Why now? What changed that made you want to expose this?" Marcus's expression crumbled, years of guilt and complicity written across his features. "They're planning something big, something that goes beyond online manipulation. There's talk of coordinated real-world actions, protests that could turn violent, targeting infrastructure to create chaos that validates the conspiracy narratives. I got into this because I believed the system was corrupt, and maybe parts of it are, but what we're doing is worse. We're destroying the very concept of truth, making it impossible for people to agree on basic reality, and I can't be part of that anymore, even if it means risking my life." The warehouse suddenly felt colder, the weight of what they were uncovering pressing down like the concrete ceiling above them. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lena, seeing his own mix of excitement and terror reflected in her eyes. This was bigger than either of them had imagined, and the story had just transformed from investigation into mission. "We need to verify everything on this drive before we move forward," Ethan said, his voice firm with the authority of experience. "If this is real, we do it right. Multiple sources, corroborating evidence, legal review, and we need to keep you safe, Marcus. Is there somewhere you can go, somewhere off the grid?" Marcus shook his head. "Nowhere is off the grid for these people. They have resources, connections in places you wouldn't believe. But I knew the risks when I reached out. Just promise me you'll publish the truth. All of it, no matter what happens to me." The commitment hung in the air, a pact sealed not with signatures, but with shared purpose. As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Ethan felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. But this time, it was different. This time he wasn't alone, and the burden felt somehow lighter for being shared. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, and as they walked back toward the street, Ethan couldn't help but feel they were standing at the edge of something that would either save them or consume them completely, and there was no way to know which until they jumped. The week following their meeting with Marcus became a blur of verification and paranoia, each day bleeding into the next as Ethan and Lena worked from a rented office space in a nondescript building in Midtown. Paranoid enough to avoid their own homes but not quite ready to go completely underground. The USB drive had proven to be everything Marcus promised and more. A digital Rosetta Stone that decoded the mechanics of modern disinformation with chilling precision. Financial records traced money from shell corporations to influencers and content creators who had been unknowingly laundering propaganda through their platforms. Chat logs revealed coordination between seemingly independent conspiracy theorists who were actually following detailed scripts designed by behavioral psychologists. Most damning were the strategic documents outlining multi-year plans to destabilize public trust in democratic institutions, media, and science itself, creating a population so confused and divided that they would accept authoritarianism as a solution to manufactured chaos. Ethan cross-referenced every claim, reached out to forensic accountants, verified digital signatures, and slowly built a case that was ironclad enough to withstand the inevitable backlash. Lena dove into the technical aspects, tracing IP addresses and analyzing metadata that confirmed the authenticity of the documents while also mapping the network's true scope. What they discovered was terrifying in its sophistication. The operation wasn't the work of a single organization, but rather a loose coalition of actors with different motivations but overlapping interests. Foreign intelligence services seeking to weaken American democracy, domestic extremist groups pursuing ideological agendas, and opportunistic grifters monetizing chaos through donations and merchandise sales. The genius was in the decentralization. No single point of failure, no mastermind who could be arrested and dismantle the whole operation. It was Hydra-like, adaptive, and had embedded itself so deeply into the fabric of online discourse that removing it would require systemic change that seemed almost impossible to imagine. As they worked, Lena opened up more about David, her brother, sharing stories of the person he used to be before the algorithms got hold of him. A social worker who cared about helping people, who volunteered at homeless shelters, who had dreams of making the world better. The contrast with what he had become was heartbreaking, and Ethan found himself thinking about all the families torn apart by this invisible war being waged for hearts and minds. The breakthrough came on the 6th day, when Lena discovered communications suggesting an imminent operation. "They're planning a demonstration in Washington, D.C. for next month," she said, her face pale as she read through encrypted messages she had managed to decrypt using keys found in Marcus's data. "But it's not just a demonstration. They're going to stage a false flag event, something violent that they'll blame on their political opponents to radicalize their base even further and justify more extreme actions. Ethan, people could die." The words landed like a bomb in the small office, shattering any illusion that they were merely observers documenting something for history. They had a responsibility now, an ethical imperative that went beyond journalism into the realm of moral action. Ethan grabbed his coat, mind racing through options. "We need to go to the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, someone with the authority to stop this." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. How many of those institutions had been compromised or at least paralyzed by the very conspiracy theories they were investigating? Who could they trust when trust itself had become the target? Lena was already on her feet, packing her laptop and the encrypted backups they had made of Marcus's drive. "We publish first, then go to the authorities. If we hand this over without making it public, it could disappear, get classified, or worse. The only protection we have is sunlight, getting this in front of as many eyes as possible so they can't bury it." Ethan knew she was right, but the journalist in him also recognized the impossibility of their situation. They had the story of the decade, maybe the century, but no major publication would touch it without weeks of legal review and editorial oversight that they didn't have time for. "I have one contact left," he said finally, thinking of Sarah Chen, an editor at a digital investigative outlet, who had stood by him even after the Anderson case fell apart. She's been pushing for this kind of reporting, and her platform is independent enough that they might move fast. But we need to be ready for what comes after, the attacks, the scrutiny, the attempts to discredit us using the same playbook we're exposing. They worked through the night, crafting a story that was simultaneously comprehensive and accessible, detailed enough for experts to verify, but clear enough for general audiences to understand. Ethan poured 18 months of frustration and redemption into every paragraph, finding his voice again after so long in the wilderness. Lena contributed data visualizations and technical analysis that made the invisible machinery visible, transforming abstract concepts into concrete evidence that demanded response. By dawn, they had a publishable piece, and Ethan sent it to Sarah with a message that was equal parts plea and warning. The response came within an hour. "This is incredible and terrifying. Legal is reviewing now. If it checks out, we publish tonight. Be safe." The wait was excruciating, every minute feeling like an hour, as they imagined all the ways things could go wrong. Marcus had gone dark after their meeting, and they had no way of knowing if he was safe or if the network had already discovered his betrayal. At 7 p.m., Sarah called. "We're live in 10 minutes. I hope you're ready for your life to change again." Ethan looked at Lena, seeing in her expression a mirror of his own mix of terror and exhilaration. "As ready as we'll ever be," he replied. They watched the article go live, the headline stark and uncompromising. "The architecture of unreality inside the network destroying truth in America." Within minutes, it began to spread across social media, journalists and researchers sharing it with commentary that ranged from shock to validation that their own suspicions had been confirmed. The phone that Ethan had retrieved from his apartment began ringing incessantly. Interview requests, fact-checking inquiries, threats from anonymous numbers. Outside the window, New York City continued its eternal rhythm. Millions of people going about their lives unaware that a bomb had just been detonated in the information ecosystem they inhabited. The real battle was just beginning, and whether they had succeeded or merely painted targets on their backs remained to be seen. Days turned into weeks, and the story refused to die despite coordinated efforts to discredit it. Congressional hearings were scheduled, tech platforms scrambled to address their role in amplifying disinformation, and slowly, painstakingly, real change began to emerge from the chaos. Lena received a message from David, just 3 words. "I'm sorry, sis." It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall that had separated them, and that was enough to keep her fighting. Ethan found himself fielding job offers from major outlets, his reputation not just restored, but enhanced by the courage it took to come back from disgrace. But the work wasn't finished. Marcus's data had revealed only one network, and there were others, constantly evolving, learning from each exposure. As winter gave way to spring, Ethan and Lena continued their investigation, now with resources and support they had lacked before, but also with a deeper understanding of the enemy they faced. Not a conspiracy in the traditional sense, but something more insidious, the exploitation of human psychology, the weaponization of doubt, and the systematic destruction of shared reality. The truth behind society's most shocking conspiracy theories turned out to be simpler and more disturbing than any fiction. That in an age of unlimited information, truth had become the scarcest commodity, and those who controlled the narrative controlled everything. But knowing that was the first step toward resistance, and as Ethan looked out over the city that had nearly broken him, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, not just hope, but purpose, and the unshakable conviction that some fights were worth whatever they cost.